turn it on.
Great. Good morning, SIGCOMM'. Good morning. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the last day of SIGCOMM' 2023, session 15, all layers considered. After an electrifying business meeting, get ready to be jolted awake with some amazing papers from all corners of the network stack. Our first presenter is Erik, who's a PhD at the University of Maryland, where he likes doing excellent work and also dogs. And his presentation is called IPv6 Hit Lists at Scale. Be careful what you wish for.
Good morning. Thanks. Yeah, 9 a.m. on the last day. These are the true diehards of the network community, so I appreciate you being here. My name is indeed Erik. I'm at the University of Maryland. This work was done in conjunction with my advisor, Dave Levin. Internet-wide scans have become sort of fundamental to doing network measurement and security research. They're kind of the default hammer that we hit a lot of different nails with these days. A wide variety of applications benefit from being able to do internet-wide scans, from vulnerability discovery and outage detection to doing internet census and those sorts of applications. And the primary driver, the primary reason that the internet-wide scans have become so ubiquitous and so important to us in the network measurement and security space is because of a tool called ZMAP that was introduced in 2013. So ZMAP, for the unfamiliar, allows you to scan the entire IPv4 address space in less than an hour. So you no longer have to pick and choose what addresses you want to probe. You can just do them all. Over the same decade that ZMAP has become ubiquitous and indispensable, however, IPv6, the successor to IPv4, has experienced an explosive amount of growth. And so you might think that we can play the same kinds of tricks in IPv6 where we just exhaustively probe every address, but the much larger address space of IPv6 precludes us from doing so. And in addition, it's not like it's just around the corner. We're not going to achieve internet-wide scanning in IPv6 and some kind of tractable amount of time, barring some kind of fundamental change with how we do networking. So instead, in IPv6, instead of probing every address on the IPv6 internet, instead what we do is we work with what we call hit lists of known active addresses that we collate and share with each other and use to kind of approximate the same kinds of measurements and security applications that we have in v4. So whereas yesterday's internet measurements were dependent upon internet-wide scanning, tomorrow's internet measurements depend on building better and more comprehensive and more complete hit lists. And so the general structure of this talk is as follows. First, I'll talk about how some current state-of-the-art builds IPv6 hit lists. I'll talk about our approach and how our approach is not a replacement for current state-of-the-art, but is rather kind of another piece to the puzzle and uses the state-of-the-art as kind of a building block. Then I'll talk about some benefits of building, being able to build larger hit lists as we do in this work. Primarily today I'll talk about how the addresses that we discover are complementary to those that are in current state-of-the-art hit lists. And then finally I'll close with some potential privacy threats that go along with the ability to build larger hit lists. So first things first, I'll talk about how prior approaches and current state-of-the-art builds IPv6 hit lists. So one of the things that I really enjoy about IPv6 is that you have to measure different parts of the IPv6 internet differently. And so if you're attempting to find active addresses that are at the core of the internet, core internet infrastructure, routers and transit ASs, you need to use tools that are sort of traceroute-like. And the current state-of-the-art tool that we use to find core internet infrastructure is a tool called YARP, or Yelling at Random Routers Progressively. And it essentially just works in exactly the same way that traceroute does, but it does in a stateless manner. It's sending out lots of hop limited is the IPv6 term for TTL limited probes that expire somewhere in the core of the internet. We get ICMP errors back that tell us what addresses are active in the core of the internet. So lots of folks do this. CADA's a network measurement group out at UC San Diego, and some folks at TU Munich and now NPI do lots of YARP scans, and the folks at TU Munich put out the IPv6 hit list, which is the current state of the art. I'm going to talk about these two data sets in the future because we compare our work to theirs. If you're instead interested in discovering active servers and home routers, you go about discovering these addresses in a bit different way in IPv6. So you might seed your discovery by using DNS records and domain lists to kind of clue you in on average addresses that might be active, that you then follow up by using active measurement tools like YARP and an extension that the TU Munich and MPI folks put out to ZMAP called ZMAP6. I've done a bunch of work in this space. A lot of people do a lot of work, good work in this space. But the key thing to note here is that this is also active measurements. You might be wondering, where are all the clients in all of this? We haven't talked about any clients. We've talked about servers and home gateways and core internet infrastructure. And you're right, the clients are largely missing from this picture. So this is represents kind of a blind spot in prior approaches building of IPv6 hit lists. And there's a couple of reasons for this. But the main driver is just that it's very hard to find active clients in IPv6 by using active measurements. The reasons for that are twofold. First, clients in IPv6 typically pick random addresses, and then they rotate them frequently. So because they're random, they're very hard for us to guess, and because they're hard for us to guess, it's hard to send probes to addresses that we can't guess. And further, these client devices are often behind stateful firewalls, printers inside of people's houses or smart TVs, things like that. Even if we knew their address, I couldn't get traffic to them in many cases. So because of this, state-of-the-art hit lists typically lack meaningful representation of client addresses in them. And so we set out to kind of see if we could do something about that. And I'm a big work smarter, not harder kind of guy. And so we said, what if we were just able to bring the clients to us? And so our idea here was to run some servers that would generate a lot of client traffic from clients. And so we set up a bunch of NTP servers, and we were hoping that a bunch of clients would come to us so that we could just learn their IP addresses in a passive manner without having to guess them, without having to send a bunch of active measurement traffic out onto the internet. NTP for the uninitiated is a popular service that most internet hosts need. There's lots of applications that require precise timing, certificate validation, to name one of them. And so I get like a corollary or a nice add-on of running these NTP servers to generate active IPv6 addresses instead of sending out a bunch of not useless measurement traffic, but not useful measurement traffic either. We're instead providing a useful service in addition to learning about active v6 addresses. So your next question might be, sure, anyone can set up an NTP server, but how do you get people to visit your NTP server? And that's a great question. Fortunately, there's an excellent project called the NTP Pool. It essentially crowdsources volunteers that donate their NTP servers to this project. And the NTP Pool, for clients that are configured to use it, will provide the clients that are configured to use the NTP pool with addresses from the NTP pool based on where they think the client is. There's some other knobs that get adjusted there as well, but generally, IP geolocation is one of the main factors that goes into what addresses get fed to what clients when they go to the NTP pool. So what we did was we established 27 NTP servers and cloud hosting providers on 6 different continents and ran them for over 7 months. And in that 7 months, we were visited by nearly 8 billion unique active IPv6 addresses. So the scale here is quite large. We're looking at several orders of magnitude larger in terms of just raw number of active addresses that we see compared to current state of the art. We find that the addresses that we find and our technique is not a replacement for current state-of-the-art techniques. Rather, this is kind of a building block. This is complementary to current hit list techniques. And we'll talk more about how we know that we're finding different addresses here in a second. In fact, right now we'll talk about that. So I'll talk about some of the benefits of having these larger hit lists and how we know that we're finding complementary addresses to those in other concurrent and prior state-of-the-art. So I'm going to be focusing primarily on IP address entropy, and specifically I'm looking at the entropy of the lower 64 bits of IPv6 addresses. That is called the interface identifier. It's the part of the IPv6 address that uniquely identifies an interface. The upper 64 bits are used to indicate what network that IP address is a part of. And so for the rest of these slides, I'm focusing on the normalized entropy of the interface identifier. So earlier in this talk, I kind of divided the IPv6 internet into three broad categories, and I'm going to try to convince you that the IIDs have different entropies in those categories. So routers tend to have very low entropy IIDs because people have to type these addresses in manually to command lines, and so they have very low entropy addresses. Servers and home routers have can either have low entropy addresses because they're also actively managed by humans, or sometimes we see that they have higher entropy addresses as well. But clients, on the other hand, almost always have very high entropy addresses because they're generating them randomly and they're changing them fairly frequently. So we see kind of a division in address entropy between these three classes. So when we're comparing our work with prior work, we see that CADA, who does primarily YARP scans, is finding mostly router addresses, and so those addresses are very low entropy. The IPv6 hit list sees a bunch of servers and home gateways, as well as some internet infrastructure, so they're seeing much higher address entropy. But our NTP data set has the highest entropy of all, and the primary driver behind that is just that we're seeing lots of clients visit us, and we're not discovering nearly as much of the core internet infrastructure or servers. So finally, I'll talk about a couple of potential privacy threats or dangers. They focus largely around the large-scale use and continued use of a legacy form of addressing called EUI64 addresses. EUI64 addresses embed the MAC address of the interface into the lower 64 bits of the IP address. That's bad for a couple of reasons. A, it permits device identification. We know who the hardware manufacturer is. And in our work, we find almost 200 million of MAC addresses embedded in IPv6 addresses. And those manufacturers are primarily like home IoT manufacturers, like Amazon. These are Kindles, these are Alexas, that kind of thing. Sonos makes smart speakers. And then finally, the last potential privacy concern here is user tracking. So because the MAC address stays stable over time, as a user rotates through different networks, that MAC address and the lower 64 bits of the address are going to stay the same. So in this example, I'm showing a Huayi MAC address that's embedded in EUI64 addresses that is seen in three different Chinese ASs over time. We see this like frequently changing between these three ASs. So this, I don't have ground truth here, but this is potentially an individual that's moving between like a home and a cellular network and maybe an office network or something like that. So to conclude, we build on current state-of-the-art and IPv6 hit list generation. I hopefully convinced you that the addresses that we find in our IPv6 hit list creation are different than those in prior work, and then I've ended with a couple of potential privacy harms or dangers that come about by being able to create such large hit lists. So that ends my talk, and I'm happy to take questions.
All right, we got some questions.
Hi, this is Oliver Gasser from MPI for Informatics. Great talk, Eric. I have two questions. So the first one being, how long do you think, or did you measure how long the addresses will be responsive after you have discovered them via NTP? Because, I mean, since they're clients, you have a privacy extension, so you're rotating addresses, also have prefix rotation. And the second question is, what would you say to IPv6 researchers? Should they now, if they want to run measurements, all run NTP servers to collect addresses?
Yeah, both great questions. To answer the first question, how long do we, what are the lifetimes of some of the addresses that we see? In many cases, we only see them arrive at our NTP servers once, and then we never see them again, either because they never come to our specific NTP servers or because they change their address. And so, yeah, these things are very ephemeral. However, on the flip side of that, we do see some addresses that we saw the entire period of our 7-month measurement. And then to take a stab at the second one, the NTP pool is a fantastic resource, and the guys that run it are great. I think that if we as a community want to use the NTP pool to do these kind of large-scale measurements, we would do well to coordinate with them, and in the paper we talk about how we did reach out to the people that run the NTP pool to at least inform them what we're doing, and I think that's at least a key first step, and then maybe some kind of board that kind of adjudicates projects kind of in the same vein of like the Tor research board that permits certain projects to go forward, but that's Thanks for the great questions, Oliver. Oliver runs the IPv6 hit list, so. A giant in the field.
Hi, Julian from Berkeley. Great talk. I was wondering how many people actually use the NTP pool, because you said it's client configurable.
Yeah.
Do you have an idea of which percentage of clients actually use it?
It's a great question. I mean, I don't have ground truth, but I can tell you that what things don't. So iOS does not use the NTP pool. Android stopped using the NTP pool after Android 8, which is a long time ago. And Windows also does not use it. So these are primarily like Linux things that we're seeing, like older Linux that's configured to use it by default.
Okay, cool, thanks.
Thanks.
Hi, Eric. So, by the way, Mac OS also does not. I have a question, and I'm not expecting an answer, but I want to poke the bear a little bit, okay? Which is, do all IP... Sorry, Marwan from Cloudflare.
Hello.
Do all IP addresses need the same level of privacy? Is it such a bad thing that server MAC addresses are exposed, or router MAC addresses are exposed, or VPN exit? If it's not a user, if it's not a human, does it deserve the same level of privacy?
It's a great question. I'll demur and say that we as a community need to talk about that. I think that you're on the right track, right? These different addresses do deserve different levels of privacy, yes.
Thanks.
Thank the speaker. Okay, our next speaker is Xiao Zhang, who graduated from Duke 2 months ago and is now an internet measurement researcher at Thousand Eyes, where he works on Anycast optimization, internet measurement, and outage detection. And he will talk to us about regional IP Anycast.
Hello, everyone. I'm Xiao. Today, I'm going to introduce our measurement research on regional IP Anycast network. This is a joint research project with Nanjing University, Duke University, and Old Dominion University. IP Anycast is a routing mechanism that allows routers to announce the same IP prefix from multiple different locations. In this talk, we refer to each location where the prefix is announced as an Anycast site. For example, in the figure, I show 3 Anycast sites. Typically, each site has an on-site router and servers that receive client traffic. Suppose they all announce the same IP prefix. Based on BGP routing policy, different client traffic designated to the Anycast prefix may reach different client sites. We refer to the site of clients that reach a site as the site's catchment. Today, Anycast is used by many geo-replicated services, such as DNS true name servers, content distribution networks, DDoS mitigation services, and cloud-based transit services. Our work focuses on the performance of IP Anycast CDNs. The simplicity of IP Anycast came with a downside. It gives a CDN operator little control over which site its client traffic reaches. The border gateway protocol routes a client traffic to a CDN site based on its policies and network topology dynamics. Since BGP is a policy routing protocol, its best path selection algorithm does not incorporate performance metrics directly associated with end-to-end latency. As a result, BGP often routes a client to an Anycast site that is geographically distant from the nearest Anycast sites, leading to high client latency. We refer to this pathology as catchment inefficiency. Here, we have an example to show the Anycast inefficiency. The CDN we studied have 2 involved sites, one transited by level 3 in Ashburn, Virginia, and the other one connect to Singapore Telecom in Singapore. Then level 3 peer with Xiao network, and the Singapore Telecom is a customer of Xiao. The round-trip time from a probe in DC to Ashburn is just 2 milliseconds, but the probe will be routed to Singapore Telecom with 252 milliseconds in Anycast, since Xiao prefers the prefix came from its customer rather than its peers. Recently, several private and public CDNs adopted regional IP Anycast as a promising approach to address some of the limitations of IP Anycast. A CDN that employs regional IP Anycast partitions its sites into various geographical regions, such as continents or large countries, and announce a distinct IP Anycast prefix from the sites in each region. When a client makes a DNS query to one of CDN's customers, the CDN's DNS will return a regional IP Anycast address based on the client's location. Consequently, clients reach nearby CDN sites. In this work, we aim to answer the following 2 questions. First, how do CDNs deploy regional IP Anycast? Second, how much does regional IP Anycast improve client latencies compared to global IP Anycast? We describe the high-level methodology we use to answer those 2 questions. First, we develop a method to uncover which CDNs use regional Anycast IP, And we found among the top 20 CDN providers, Agile and Improva are the two CDN providers adopt regional IP Anycast. Then we discover client partition for a client located in a geographical region. It means what regional IP it received while the client query for the websites hosted by regional Anycast CDN providers. After that, we determine CDN site partition at all, which CDN site announces a regional IP prefix. Lastly, we compare regional IP Anycast performance with global IP Anycast, which is the name server of Improva in our case. Next, we describe the findings of this work. Here we show how Improva partition its clients and CDN sites for different regions. In the left graph, it shows how the client is partitioned into 6 different regions. Clients in each region received a unique regional IP shown by different colors. In the right graph, it shows the CDN sites that announce different prefixes in different regions. As we can see, the partition largely follow continent and large countries' borders, and the clients in a region tend to receive the regional Anycast IP announced by the co-located Anycast sites. We select the global counterpart of the Improva, the name server of the Improva, to compare with the default Improva regional Anycast to show the performance difference. We find the regional IP Anycast reduce client latencies in some regions of the world. The solid line shows the client latency distribution in the EMEA, which is Europe, Middle East, and Africa, and also North America regions, respectively. The dashed line shows the global IP Anycast performance in the same 2 regions. We can see that the 95 percentile latency in the EMEA region is reduced from 165 milliseconds in global IP Anycast to 67 milliseconds in regional IP Anycast. Similarly, in the North America region, the 95 percentile latency is reduced from 221 milliseconds to 54 milliseconds. However, in other regions of the world, regional IP Anycast can achieve worse latencies than the global IP Anycast. For example, in the Latin America region, we found that 95 percentile latency increases from 101 milliseconds in global Anycast to 120 milliseconds in the global Anycast, in the regional IP Anycast. We found 2 main reasons that cause DNS mapping inefficiency. First, some probes can receive a different regional Anycast IP, which does not belong to its region, which induce longer latency. For example, in Agile regional IP Anycast CDN, 5.4 of Asian Pacific probes and 3.5 of Latin America probes get incorrect regional IP. Second, some probes along the national border can actually get better performance from a server in another region due to limited sites deployed in its own region. For example, Improva partition its probes and sites in North America into 2 different regions, Canada and also United States. Around 10% of probes in Canada and United States are located near the Canada and US borders. Some of these probes have shorter round-trip time to regional IPs in the other country. Our measurement study rewinds the impact of DNS mapping inefficiency on regional Anycast performance. That naturally leads us to question how much performance improvement regional Anycast can achieve over global Anycast if we improve its DNS mapping strategies. So we developed a latency-based client partition and mapping mechanism and test with Tango testbed. We call this algorithm reopt. Then we partition the Tango testbed into geographical regions using k-means algorithm. We varies the number of partitions to find the optimal number of regions that achieve the lowest average client latency. Then we use Amazon Route 53 DNS service to map all Web Atlas probes in one country to the regional IPs with the lowest average latency. The figure on the top right shows the client and site partition schema generated by our algorithm. The bottom graph shows the CDF of client latency distribution to their regional IP Anycast sites. Solid line shows the latency distribution of regional IP Anycast, and dashed line shows the global IP Anycast. As we can see, all solid line lines are to the left of the dashed lines with the same color, indicating regional Anycast have lower client latency. As we can see in this case, the latency-based method achieve lower latencies in all regions measured compared to the global Anycast. To sum up, in this work, we conclude the first extensive study of regional IP Anycast CDNs. Then we validate the performance advantages of regional Anycast experimentally and discover DNS mapping errors may increase the client latencies in some regions. Lastly, we design and evaluate a latency-based region partition and client mapping schema that addresses DNS mapping efficiency using the Tango testbed. And that's all for the talk. I'm happy to take questions.
Hi, I'm Sharad from Microsoft. Thank you for the work. So I'm wondering about the following thing, which is that your results of latency differences could be influenced by a number of factors, three of which immediately come to mind. One is that there may be regional requirements that customers have. Country A users should only be served out of servers in country A. Another one is, server load. Country A servers are a bit overloaded right now, so I'm going to send them to country B. And the third is what peerings I have and what policies those peers apply. So I'm wondering if you can color your results against those factors or maybe others and tell us about that.
Okay, that's a very good question. So for the Anycast CDN performance, yeah, it did have many factors that could affect their performance. But sometimes it can be some policy-based like regulation. Nowadays they have lots of regulations published in different countries to ensure only the server can be accessed, only the server located in that country can be accessed. So in conventional CDNs like the unicast-based CDN, it's usually very easy to implement that. But for the global Anycast one, sometimes it's pretty difficult. I know Azure also use different rings to assign clients to different regions. And I remember, 2021 work, it mentioned that's because some regulation things. Yeah.
Sorry, Ari Fogel, AWS. So you had mentioned that a good percentage of clients are mapped to the wrong region. And forgive me if you discuss this in the paper, but what is the reason for that?
Yeah, that's actually a very good question because because we mentioned that in the regional Anycast CDN, so the first crucial step is to map the clients to the correct regional prefix. So that's usually based on some IP geo mapping techniques. So we found out that actually in our later experiments using Amazon Route 53, the precision is very good. But for the other one, they usually regard this part as a black box. So for this, the example shows, especially in this case, we found several prefix was assigned by rep, but it's holding by the clients in Latin America. So when the Latin America clients want to get access to the regional CDN, the IP geolocation usually returns the wrong result, which lead them to the Europe prefix. Thanks for the question. Yeah.
One more question in the back.
Lockman, Columbia University, thank you for your talk. One thing I was wondering is, by having regional Anycast, you are potentially also reducing the scope of, your DDoS survival rate in a way, because now you just have smaller part of the network that are announcing. So can you discuss about the trade-off in terms of, resiliency versus performance on having regional Anycast compared to global Anycast?
Okay, you mean the different number of different regions?
Yeah, what I mean is that when you have global Anycast, you potentially have more resilience because you have more sites announcing the same prefix versus regional, where you might have smaller, and so you are more likely to suffer from DDoS.
DDoS, you mean some kind of attack?
Yes.
Yeah, that's actually a very good question. So we actually have some discussion in the draft. So for the smaller, that's true. For the smaller deployment, it usually have difficulty to absorb that that large volume of traffic, but the traffic to that specific region is also reduced, like the intended traffic. And also nowadays the DDoS protection for Anycast network is usually based on the other like systems. Yeah, so we can like maybe make this question offline. Thank you.
Let's thank the speaker. Great, thank you. Our third talk is by Huayi Duan, who is a postdoc at ETH Zurich, where he is working on securing domain systems with formal foundations. And the title of his talk is A Formal Framework for End-to-End DNS Resolution.
Thank you, Eddie, for the introduction. So, all right, let's get started. So I'm going to present our work on building a formal framework for DNS. This is joint work with Lucas, Marco, Yod, David, and Adrian. So DNS name resolution is often believed to be a simple process, right? Here's a textbook example. Upon receiving a client request, which is shown in green, a recursive resolver will do some work and respond with an answer, which is shown in blue. And in particular, the resolver asks a hierarchy of name servers, right? First getting referrals from the root and top level domain servers, and then the final answer from the authoritative server. But the process is much more involved in reality, right? So let's continue the example. Here, each server is identified by a name, and we ignore the client and the root server. In step 1, if the resolver doesn't know the IP address of the referred server in ns1.b.net, it must resolve the name with additional queries in steps 2 and 3, starting again from the top level domain. Only after that can the resolver ask the server ns1.b.net for the final answer, right? And note that this referral process can actually be recursive. What does it mean is that in step 1, if the address of the server ns2.com is unknown, the resolver has to send even more additional queries. And also, a response can contain multiple NS records. And then the resolver has to decide which server to ask. This is actually a form of non-determinism in DNS. And another essential part of DNS is caching, which is a big topic with many things to consider: data freshness, concurrency, and etc. And one sub aspect here is how a resolver handles data with different credibility levels, right? A DNS response contains multiple sections. Data in the answer section is often considered to be trustworthy, but data in the additional section is not, right? So a resolver must decide which data to accept and whether to override data in the cache. So what we have seen here is just the tip of the iceberg. There have been over 300 DNS-related RFCs today, and the number is still growing at roughly 2 pages per week. And moreover, DNS features are not orthogonal to each other, right? Introducing a new feature may affect many parts of the system in unexpected ways. So as a result of such complexity, it's unsurprising that DNS is very hard to get right? Especially in large-scale deployments. There are frequent outages caused by minor misconfigurations, like these examples. And what's even more concerning is that a flurry of DNS vulnerabilities were discovered recently. They can really break the system in really subtle ways, right? In terms of integrity or availability. So, in fact, many DNS bugs are detected only at the wrong time, and many vulnerabilities are found by ad hoc analysis, sometimes even by chance. So apparently, this break and fix circle is not ideal, right? So what we need is a principled approach that can proactively and systematically identify problems, right? Preferably in an automated way. And this should be done over a mathematically precise model because DNS protocols are specified in human language with a lot of ambiguities and under-specification that can lead to crackness and security issues. So this has motivated us to create a formal framework for DNS. We choose mode as our modern language because it supports rewriting logic, which is very expressive to model distributed and concurrent system with stateful computation. There's also a large ecosystem around the mode with a bunch of tools for different types of formal analysis. And our DNS semantics covers end-to-end name resolution between the client, recursor, and the name server. And we have formalized all major RFCs that specify the resolution algorithm and its refinements up to the latest changes required for querying and minimization. And in comparison, the state-of-the-art model grew to abstract many essential operations of the resolver, including the subquery and the caching mechanism discussed earlier. So basically, we model DNS as a label translation system where different actors maintain their local state and act upon asynchronous message passing. And system states consists of all actors and messages, and the system's dynamics is specified by a set of rewriting rules which translate the system from one state to another. And our model has two variants for different types of formal verification, which I will introduce shortly. So we have tried to resolve any RFC ambiguities encountered in our formalization. For example, a resolver should choose only one execution part for a given response, even the response match multiple cases according to RFC. On the other hand, if we found ambiguity cannot be resolved clearly, then we make it configurable in our model, such that we can analyze different interpretations of the specs. Right? For example, here, as highlighted in this table, the minimal credibility level requirements for a resolver to rank data, as mentioned earlier. So we have actually provided many such options in our model to make our semantics highly configurable. Here's only a partial list of them. So now what can we do with our framework? Well, the simplest analysis we can do is simulation, where we run a single execution of our semantics with an initial state, which contains the set of actor configurations on files and a client request. And the simulation allows the sanity checks of our semantics, right? So for instance, whether it can pass standard DNS test cases. So in this case, our semantics can be regarded as a reference implementation of DNS specs. A more useful type of formal analysis you can do is the model checking, which explore all execution paths from a given initial state. And for this, we can again use model's built-in model checker and verify qualitative properties. For example, whether a set of zone files are misconfigured with the circle dependency or rewrite black hole. And we have predefined a library of all properties, including all those you see here, and including all those supported by Groot. But there's a catch. Here, a property is just verified against a single client request, right? This might not be interesting because we don't know whether the property holds for numerous other queries as well. So our solution is to introduce a generated component that can automatically create different initial states, and which allows a model checker to non-deterministically explore the initial state space. Yet it's still intractable to exhaustively search all queries, right? So the next step is to define a notion of query equivalence class such that all queries in one class have identical resolution results. And it is wise to analyze one sample query from each class to obtain guarantees for all. A challenge here is to come up with a proper notion of equivalence class. And we found that the seminal definition proposed by Groot is actually unsound with respect to our model, but we can still apply it as a very useful heuristic in our analysis. And with this approach, we can now verify properties that hold for all queries up to an equivalence class notion. And next, with the probabilistic variants of our model, we can do statistical verification, right? For example, with the p-VESTA statistical model checker. And the properties of interest here are generally quantitative and performance related, right? We can answer questions like, with a certain statistical confidence, what is the probability that a property holds? And here's an example. So we analyze the query success ratio of a client when DNS servers are under a denial of service attack. And with the typical confidence level, the verified reports that 71% of client requests can still be answered even in the middle of this attack. And if we double the attack's intensity, the ratio decreases to 52%. And yet if we switch on mitigation option in our model, the ratio increases as expected. Likewise, operators can use our framework to assess the resilience of their DNS setup and make informed decisions. We've also applied our framework to analyze amplification vulnerabilities where a single client request can trigger a large number of resolver queries. And the idea is to run our model with randomized zone configuration and client request while monitoring the resulting amplification factor. And if it goes beyond a certain threshold, we'll manually analyze the suspicious initial state to find the cause of amplification. With this approach, we have rediscovered all major amplification factors reported in the literature. And we have also discovered several new vulnerabilities that can result in pretty high amplification factor by exploiting the interaction between different DNS features like the rewrite of NS names. And we have also confirmed all these vulnerabilities in major software. As can be seen from the plots, where y-axis is the amplification factor and x-axis is the attack parameter. our model's results shown as lines are almost always consistent with the result measured on real software shown as markers. So this demonstrates the precision and the predictive power of our model. All right, I guess I have 2 more minutes, but I already close to the end. Well, so we can take more questions. But anyway, to wrap up, we have made a step in building a formal foundation for DNS, and with the most comprehensive semantics today, and the most versatile verification techniques, and as well as a set of tools for automation. There's, of course, much more to do. For example, we can enhance our model with more DNS features like DNSSEC, Duan, and we can also, conduct more theoretical research on equivalence class for state space reduction. So I guess I will stop here, and thank you for your attention. We'll be happy to take questions.
Hi, Tom from Columbia. One thing that we saw is that resolvers, et cetera, often go against the DNS protocol, I guess, for example, not evicting entries from the cache. Does this model take those violations into account?
I think what I'm talking about is more like some implementation-specific operation of the resolver. So, yeah. But our focus is not really on the protocol level thing. So, so the short answer is no, we didn't take that into account. Yeah.
But like, does your framework admit that if you want to?
Yes, if we can refine. We can keep refining our framework up to the implementation level. Really to approach the real software. But at the current stage, no, we don't consider that. I do encourage you, to try our framework and see how that could be modeled. Yeah.
Nate Foster, Cornell. Really cool work. One of the nice things about using a tool like Mod is that you can easily test the semantics, maybe against a real implementation. I'm curious if you had any thoughts on testing the probabilistic and timed aspects. That seems a lot trickier than testing just the functional semantics.
That's an excellent question. So I think our model actually supports the verification of our analysis of time aspect. Actually, if you think about it, like as I mentioned, we have 2 variants for our model, one deterministic model and one probabilistic model. And for the probabilistic variant of our model, actually we do take time into consideration. We basically, the way we transform the non-deterministic model into a probabilistic model is to assign a random message delay to each message, And with that, actually, we can model time and also things like TTAO and everything. So we can, do statistical verification. That's how we can do that. Otherwise, it's not possible. Yeah.
Other questions? I actually had one more question.
Sure.
One thing that we often think as we model a protocol is we suddenly get an idea of how to do the whole thing differently, better, more simply. Yeah. Did you have any such ideas as you went through this modeling exercise?
Yeah, for sure. You mean just come up with some different views of the protocol? How can we do better? Or
were you ever like, oh, DNS did it this way, but it would have been so much simpler to model and so much more clearly correct if they had done it this way instead?
I think that actually that's something what we are doing actually in designing a new protocols, kind of new protocols for DNS. But I think the things that you always start very simple, right? You always start very simple, but after some time you find you have to, really figure out all those, features. They're all interacting, or they're all, kind of interleaving. So you cannot, of course you can start simple, but end up with all those complexity eventually. It's always like that. So, yeah. But I do hope that our new protocols can, be, comparatively simpler than DNS today, so we can deploy it. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Our last speaker of the day is Donika Mirdita, who is a PhD student at TU Darmstadt, where she breaks things in order to make them more secure. And she will have a video presentation, after which she's here to answer questions.
Hello all, and thank you for being here. My name is Donika Mirdita, and I will introduce our work on RPKI validators on behalf of my team and I. One fundamental but little talked about aspect of the RPKI infrastructure is built-in limits and thresholds. RPKI is an infrastructure poised to handle large sensitive data that needs to be periodically and efficiently distributed among participants. But the logistics of supporting this stream of information in full deployment still needs to be figured out. Before we go to the core of our paper, I want to provide a quick overview of what RPKI is and how it works. So RPKI is a standard developed to protect the BGP from prefix hijacks. It relies on the issuance and distribution of cryptographically signed objects called ROAs, which are a mapping between autonomous systems and the prefixes that they own. The serving of ROAs is done via publication points, each of which is responsible for issuing and serving a subset of global ROAs. Publication points are organized in a hierarchical way and are queried according to their order in the RPKI tree of repositories. And finally, we have relaying parties or validators, the middleware which stands between the distributed RPKI content and routers. Relaying parties are tasked with periodically fetching the RPKI data, parsing, validating, and then sending the results to routers so they can protect their tables from bogus BGP announcements. However, RPKI can be attacked in different ways by exploiting built-in thresholds and timeouts in the relaying party software. Stalling attacks against RPKI are not new per se, and the community has tried to introduce measures, specifically through the introduction of default thresholds, such as RPKI tree depth and even timeout for individual connections. However, these thresholds were arbitrarily chosen. Not only do they not prevent attacks, but they also enable new ones. For example, tree depth might be limited, but breadth is still unconstrained. Relaying party individual connections have built-in timeout tolerances that can range from 5 minutes to hours depending on the relaying party being used. By limiting download bandwidth or simply stalling HTTP connections in tandem with a large malicious RPKI subtree, any attacker can slow down validation long enough to ensure objects such as manifests expire. Manifests notoriously have a very short validity period, with over 50% of them being valid for a day or less. So manifest expiration will ultimately force relaying parties to flush the content of the affected certificate authorities. We further observed another arbitrary threshold that could be exploited in a more creative way, one of which is what we call the delta snapshot attack. We observed that independent of the amount of ROAs in a publication point, the complete first-time full download of all objects is always considerably expensive, and a malicious entity is able to continuously trigger the worst-case download exploiting about 20% of all publication points. These are publication points that directly serve external clients. Major relaying parties, such as Routinator and RPKI client, have arbitrary delta thresholds of 100 and 300 delta files respectively. Exploiting these relatively easily triggered delta to snapshot fallback thresholds leads to slowing down of the validation interval. One way to mitigate this problem of stalling due to malicious exploitation of thresholds is by introducing a more intelligent approach to validation intervals. Instead of naive tree traversal, the validation process could account for historical latencies for every publication point. This allows us to weigh them according to performance and penalize those that slow down the process by kicking them to the back of the execution queue. At the same time, the algorithm should also allow the repositories to redeem themselves, so to speak, after the network issues or the attack is over. They can redeem themselves the moment that their latency goes back to historical norms, and then they can get bumped up the execution queue. An important requirement is multi-threading and asynchronous processing of publication points. Our simulations show that the total time required to discriminate malicious publication points is roughly equivalent to the theoretical stalling time of all the adversarial publication points per thread. On this slide, I have included a figure showing the simulated process in given 4 malicious repositories. The top row shows that naive multithreading can help somewhat with speeding up validation despite adversarial publication points, but that does not guarantee legitimate publication points will be processed in a timely manner. The bottom row simulates the effect of our sort and limit algorithm with multithreading. By prioritizing publication points with lower processing times, the number of required threads to defeat an attack can be further reduced. Even with a single thread, an adversary can ultimately only prevent the update of its own repositories, as all other benign repositories have already been processed. Given the current issues we found with regards to thresholds, we decided to make some projections on full RPKI deployment. Right now, about 30% of networks enforce ROV, and less than 40% of all IPv4 and IPv6 prefixes are covered by ROAS. Under a full deployment, we expect the number of ROAS to almost triple. And of course, the dataset will increase with additional tens of thousands of helper files and certificate authorities. But that's not all. The number of publication points should also increase drastically. Now, there are different scenarios that could play out with regards to publication point distribution, but one of them is the following. Due to the fact that publication points issue and serve a unique subset of global ROAS, the presence of large publication points that host RPKI content for the majority of the internet introduces single points of failure that can take down BGP protection for large swaths of the internet in case of targeted attacks or even network errors. Therefore, there is an inherent incentive to decentralize RPKI content hosting. At some point, best practices and even legislation could impose regulations on decentralizing critical infrastructure. Given that there are about 100,000 allocated autonomous systems, 60 to 70,000 of whom are actively being advertised, we estimate that if at least 10% of them would self-host their own repositories, we could get up to 10,000 publication points on the internet. The technology to do this, called delegated RPKI modus, already exists and is pretty stable and mature. Relaying parties need to periodically refresh their cache as well. At least once an hour is the status quo right now. So they would end up having to query thousands of publication points, and even assuming a best case scenario where each relaying party only needs 1 to 2 seconds per publication point, we still end up with hours-long validation intervals. Due to deliberate or accidental stalling because of aforementioned restrictive thresholds, and even packet losses due to heavy network usage, we can feasibly end up in situations when manifests expire and are not adequately re-downloaded, thereby downgrading RPKI protection. The number of relaying parties is also expected to increase dramatically. In general, autonomous systems do not rely on one single relaying party instance, but they instantiate several. In particular, the larger and more security-sensitive companies such as Amazon or Meta can use up to 50 or 100 relaying parties per autonomous system. Assuming then that from the 70,000 existing actively advertised autonomous systems, each of them runs at least 2 relaying parties, we land at a maximum of 140,000 relaying parties. And even more conservative approaches will still land you in the 6 digits. Full deployment of RPKI also introduces large local RPKI data caches. We estimate about 9 gigabytes, which would mean that in the grand total, over 1,200 terabytes of data transfer will have to take place over months to initialize all the 140,000 projected relaying parties. And then afterwards, even for periodic low-volume validation cycles, such as mere delta updates, we would have at least 700 megabytes of transmitted data from every publication point for every refresh interval. Our projections highlight that even a conservative future estimation of RPKI data introduces continuous large network loads that are unavoidable. RPKI data is highly dynamic, which means the relaying parties need to query all publication points multiple times a day to have an up-to-date cache. Attackers manipulating the arbitrary thresholds can further exacerbate this already large traffic. And while RPKI right now focuses on servicing ROAS, and in fact even our estimates are based on ROA projections, we expect to see the service expand further in the future to support additional BGP security protocols like BGP-SEC or ASPA. All of this is just more unaccounted for system load during full deployment. All in all, existing thresholds are too permissive in that they allow for a multitude of attacks that will only get easier and worse with increased deployment. But they are also strict enough that can cause download and connection errors for legitimate entities. It is important to find the right balance, and arbitrary thresholds are not the solution. In this work, we highlight the need for systemic work in formalizing operations thresholds for RPKI by introducing new threshold-fueled attacks. We also propose a redesign of the validation process that addresses, at least in part, existing security issues. Thank you for your attention.
Great questions. I have a question. I found the next to the last slide where you projected RPKI out into the future to really be frightening. And I wonder if you can talk about how long it would take to reach that full deployment, and what you think we should be working on to reduce those traffic requirements.
Yes, so we've monitored deployment for the past 2 years. It is, the acceptance rate globally is relatively slow, but it's picking up because we at least see more and more important companies or important providers that are accepting RPKI. So it's probably going to be an acceptance in exponential scale. Like it's small right now, but soon it may go up much faster. About preventing these bottlenecks, the problem is that, initially RPKI was thought a little bit like the BGP sister of DNSSEC. The problem is that in DNSSEC, we still have relatively low volumes, low packets, whereas in RPKI, we have to exchange very large amounts of data that they have to be multiple times a day refreshed because otherwise things expire and are flushed out. And it's going to get, what we have to do is we have to redesign the communication protocols. Right now they are naive in that you just download something and you do at your end however you want to do the process. But as we've seen, if these processes are arbitrary, the choices to how to model these download processes are arbitrary, you create attack vectors against yourself. We have actually different attack vectors for different implementations. So the community has to sit down and kind of redesign the protocols a little bit. That's the only way out of this. It's doable, but it has to be like a central endeavor, not on a case-by-case basis per each vendor.
Would you say that that is future work for the SIGCOMM community?
Yes, I think that would be an excellent future work for SIGCOMM, how to optimize such large data transfer with minimal loss. Yes.
Any other questions for Donika? Okay, we have time for a mini panel. If I could ask the other authors to join us on stage. This will be a real short one. Do you have questions for each other, or are there any questions from the room for our speakers as a group?
For the first talk, for the IPv6 one, so one thing that, one message from the talk that I got at least was that those IPv6 addresses, because they incorporate also the MAC address, they are trackable in a way. Is there, so what would be like future work, future steps you think to avoid that, to improve that, to kind of anonymize IPv6 addresses?
Yeah, good question. And the type of address you're talking about is called EUI64 addresses, and these are by no means new, nor are we the first to talk about the privacy implications of this. This has been known that this is bad for user privacy for like 25 years now. We need to stop using them, is what we need to do. In IPv6, for clients anyway, it's best practice to generate random addresses and to change them fairly frequently in order to resist tracking. So there's plenty of RFCs. Slack stateless address auto configuration with privacy extensions is what you should do as a client device anyway. Good question, thanks.
Yeah, probably have a kind of follow-up question for Erik. So I'm actually a bit surprised like how easy it is to get to kind of inject your own NTP servers right into the NTP2 pool, and then and start to checking user IP and stuff. So I'm just wondering like what's your take on this? Like how do you think like this could be mitigated, or be from the privacy point of view, how could this be improved, or yeah?
Well, the NTP pool is a great service, and I certainly don't want to discourage people from joining it, because I think this is like one of these foundational kind of internet things, right? It's people donating their equipment to use for the greater good. So I mean, I certainly don't want to encourage the community for everybody to jump in and do exactly what I did. I think obviously doing too much of this could have some negative effects on the NTP pool. So I would encourage people to communicate with the NTP pool administrators, like we did, to make sure that they're aware of experiments that are going on in their infrastructure, so that that we don't cause any harms by being too eager with this resource. Yeah. Thanks. Great question too.
Great. Let's thank our speakers. We'll have a short break, and then we'll be back here in roughly 12 minutes for the next session, which is caching and provisioning.